Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning, we'll be in Judges, chapter 7, verse 1, through chapter 8, verse 17. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his men got up the next morning and camped near the spring of Harod. The Midianites were camped north of them near the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to hand Midian over to you. Israel might brag, 'Our own strength has delivered us.' Now announce to the men, whoever is shaking with fear may turn around and leave Mount Gilead." 22,000 men went home, 10,000 remained. The Lord spoke to Gideon again. "There are still too many men. Bring them down to the water, and I will thin the ranks some more. When I say, 'This one should go with you,' pick him to go. When I say, 'This one should not go with you,' do not take him." So he brought the men down to the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "Separate those who lap the water as a dog laps from those who kneel to drink." 300 men lapped, the rest of the men kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped, I will deliver the whole army, and I will hand Midian over to you. The rest of the men should go home." The men who were chosen took supplies and their trumpets. Gideon sent all the men of Israel back to their homes. He kept only 300 men. Now the Midianites were camped down below in the valley. That night the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, attack the camp, for I am handing it over to you. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and listen to what they are saying. Then you will be brave and attack the camp." So he went down with Purah, his servant, to where the sentries were guarding the camp. Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people from the east covered the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels could not be counted. They were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, he heard a man telling another man about a dream he had. The man said, "Look, I had a dream. I saw a stale cake of barley bread rolling into the Midianite camp. It hit a tent so hard it knocked it over and turned it upside down. The tent just collapsed." The other man said, "Without a doubt, this symbolizes the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God is handing Midian and all the army over to him." When Gideon heard the report of the dream and its interpretation, he praised God. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and said, "Get up, for the Lord is handing the Midianite army over to you." He divided the 300 men into 3 units. He gave them all trumpets and empty jars with torches inside them. He said to them, "Watch me and do as I do. Watch closely. I am going to the edge of the camp. Do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, you also blow your trumpets all around the camp. Then say, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Gideon took 100 men to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guards. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars they were carrying. All 3 units blew their trumpets and broke their jars. They had the torches in their left hand and the trumpets in their right. Then they yelled, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." They stood in order all around the camp. The whole army ran away. They shouted as they scrambled away. When the 300 men blew their trumpets, the Lord caused the Midianites to attack one another with their swords throughout the camp. The army fled to Beth-shittah on the way to Zerah. They went to the border of Abel-Meholah near Tabbath. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh answered the call and chased the Midianites. Now Gideon sent messengers throughout the Ephraimite hill country who announced, "Go down and head off the Midianites. Take control of the fords of the streams all the way to Beth-barah and the Jordan River." When all the Ephraimites had assembled, they took control of the fords all the way to Beth-barah and the Jordan River. They captured the 2 Midianite generals, Oreb and Zeb. They executed Oreb on the rock of Oreb and Zeb in the winepress of Zeb. They chased the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was now on the other side of the Jordan River. The Ephraimites said to him, "Why have you done such a thing to us? You did not summon us when you went to fight the Midianites." They argued vehemently with him. He said to them, "Now what have I accomplished compared to you? Even Ephraim's leftover grapes are better quality than Abieser's harvest. It was to you that God handed over the Midianite generals, Oreb and Zeb. What did I accomplish to rival that?" When he said this, they calmed down. Now Gideon and his 300 men had crossed over the Jordan River, and even though they were exhausted, they were still chasing the Midianites. He said to the men of Succoth, Give some loaves of bread to the men who are following me, because they are exhausted. I am chasing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The officials of Succoth said, "You have not yet overpowered Zebah and Zalmunna, so why should we give bread to your army?" Gideon said, "Since you will not help, after the Lord hands Zebah and Zalmunna over to me, I will thresh your skin with desert thorns and briars." He went up from there to Penuel and made the same request. The men of Penuel reported the same way the men of Succoth had. He also threatened the men of Penuel, warning, "When I return victoriously, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their armies. There were about 15,000 survivors from the army of the eastern peoples. 120,000 sword-wielding soldiers had been killed. Gideon went up the roads of the nomads, east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and ambushed the surprised army. When Zebah and Zalmunna ran away, Gideon chased them and captured the 2 Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. He had surprised the entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He captured a young man from Succoth and interrogated him. The young man wrote down for him the names of Succoth's officials and city leaders, 77 men in all. He approached the men of Succoth and said, "Look what I have, Zebah and Zalmunna. You insulted me, saying, 'You have not yet overpowered Zebah and Zalmunna, so why should we give bread to your exhausted men?'" He seized the leaders of the city, along with some desert thorns and briars. He then threshed the men of Succoth with them. He also tore down the tower of Penuel and executed the city's men. Yeah. So, after the Lord calls Gideon, and Gideon decides once and for all that he's going to do what the Lord told him to do, after asking for multiple signs from the Lord, he goes and gathers an army of men together to himself, some 32,000 men. And I think they were Manassehites, but let me see. Yeah, in Judges 6:35, he sent messengers throughout Manasseh and summoned them to follow him as well. He also sent messengers throughout Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Yeah. So he has all of these men, and they've all gathered to him. And God says to Gideon, "You got too many men. If Israel were to defeat the Midianites now, they might attribute it to their own power and not to God." Even though at this point they were outnumbered probably 4-1 with 130,000 Midianites fighting against them. So he says first that anybody who's afraid can go home. And 2/3 of his fighting force leaves, 22,000 men, with 10,000 remaining. But this is still too many. Now that the odds are 13-1, God says to Gideon, "You still have too many. Only the ones that lap water like a dog can follow you." And so 300 men of the rest of them follow him. And after that, you have God reassuring Gideon, "Okay, you're going to go up and attack the Midianites, but if you're scared, you can go and creep down into the camp, and then you'll be good to attack." And you have this dream that two of them had here of a barley roll crashing into a tent, and he's like, "Oh, this is nobody but Gideon, the son of Joash." And so he attacks the camp. They scatter, and they're pursued by the surrounding tribes. The Ephraimites then come up to Gideon, like, "What's up, guys? You went to fight without us? ignoring the fact that they could have attacked themselves. There's no rule saying that you guys can't attack the Midianites here. But he placates them by saying, "Oh, what I've done is nothing compared to what you guys have done." And then as he's pursuing these two Midianite kings, he tries to get supplies, and both towns turn him down. He captures those kings and comes back and inflicts retribution on these two towns. So there's a general summary of the events. Let's see what Guzik has to say. "The people who are with you are too many for me." This was a great test of Gideon's faith. His army of 32,000 men was already overmatched by 135,000 Midianites. Yet God thought his army was too big, and he commanded Gideon to invite all who were afraid to go home. He was left with only 10,000 men. Gideon was probably surprised at the number of men who were afraid to fight, and hoped that only a few hundred would leave. But we are told that they assembled in a place where they could see the 135,000 Midianite troops. The sight of a huge opposing army made many Israelite soldiers afraid. Yeah, they were eager to pick up the sword, but when they saw the odds stacked against them, without considering God, they grew afraid. "Lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.' This explains why the army of 32,000 was too large. Israel could still take credit for a victory if they had 32,000 troops. They could believe they were underdogs who triumphed through their own great bravery or strategy. God wanted the odds so bad that the victory would clearly be his alone. If we really believe the principle, 'Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit,' says the Lord of hosts in Zechariah 4:6, then our smallness does not matter. If we really believe the principle, 'Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God,' from Psalm 20, verse 7, then smallness does not matter." Yeah, because ultimately what matters is the bigness of our God. The people are still too many. God already reduced Gideon's army from 32,000 to 10,000. Here he reduced it from 10,000 to 300. He did this because 10,000 were still too many for God's purpose. We rarely think that bigness can be a hindrance to the work of God, yet it is harder to truly rely on God when we have many wonderful resources at hand. Though it certainly can be done, it is hard to be big and rely on the Lord. When we are big, it is possible to do a lot in human resources and give the credit to God. Paul was in danger of being too strong for his own good. Therefore, God brought a weakness into his life so that Paul would keep relying on the Lord's strength and be stronger than ever. "Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there." This seems a strange test, and there are different ideas as to why God used this to separate the soldiers. Perhaps it was because those who cupped the water in their hands and brought it to their mouth were better soldiers because they kept their eyes on their surroundings even when taking a drink. The test was peculiarly military. Men in such a position were not on guard against sudden surprise. From Morgan. We might say that God eliminated the fearful in those who thought first only of convenience, the easy way. The thought is disturbing, but it may well be true that the composition of God's army to fight Satan's host in any day is really little different. How many Christians are so fearful of the enemy that they are of no real use in this warfare, and how many of the remainder are so self-centered rather than God-centered that they find little place for effective ministry. From Wood. "By the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand." God assured Gideon that victory was certain, even through only 300 men. Now the Israeli army was less than 1% of its original size, and the proportion was 400 Midianite soldiers to each Israeli soldier. Gideon could only trust in God because there was nothing else to trust. "Arise and go down against the camp." God wanted Gideon to find encouragement in this visit to the enemy's camp. This shows that when God asks us to do hard things for him, he doesn't fold his arms and sit back and expect us to do it on our own. He is there to guide us and keep us and to encourage us all along the way. Afterward, your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. This is the tender mercy of God. He dealt with the doubts and fears of Gideon and wanted to assure him. And a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. Only the very poor ate barley bread. This vision meant that the camp of the Midianites would be knocked over by a humble nobody. Barley meal was rather food for dogs or cattle than for men, and therefore the barley cake would be the emblem of a thing despised, from Spurgeon. This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon. God allowed Gideon to see a great confirmation of his future work. This was obviously no coincidence and no display of luck. God used this situation to build the faith of Gideon, and it worked so well that all Gideon could do was worship God. It was no accident that the man dreamed the dream that night. No accident that he told his friend about it at just that moment. No accident that Gideon came to the exact place where he overheard the man telling the dream. I think if I had been Gideon, I should have said to myself, I do not so much rejoice in what this dreamer saith, as I do in the fact that he has told his dream at the moment when I was lurking near him. I see the hand of the Lord in this, and I am strengthened by the sight. Verily, I perceive that the Lord worketh all things with unfailing wisdom, and faileth not in his designs. He that has ordained this matter can order all things else. From Spurgeon. It must have built the faith of Gideon to know that his enemies were afraid of him. When we are weak in faith, we often make our enemies stronger than they really are. We could say that the devil himself is afraid of the normal Christian, or at least afraid of what they could become. We should take it to heart. Our enemies, both human and spiritual, are at their core afraid of us. Behold the host of doubters and heretics and revilers, who at the present time have come up into the inheritance of Israel, hungry from their deserts of rationalism and atheism. They are eating up all the corn of the land. They cast a doubt upon all the verities of our faith, but we need not fear them. For if we heard their secret counsels, we should perceive that they are afraid of us. Their loud blusterings and their constant sneers are the index of real fear. Those who preach the cross of our Lord Jesus are the terror of modern thinkers. In their heart of hearts, they dread the preaching of the old-fashioned gospel, and they hate what they dread. On their beds, they dream of the coming of some evangelist into their neighborhood. What the name of Richard was to the Saracens, that is the name of Moody to these boastful intellects. From Spurgeon. Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Gideon's encouragement was contagious. Having received encouragement, he could not help but spread that encouragement to others, and his encouragement built their faith. But what a pity it is that we should need such little bits of things to cheer us up, when we have matters of far surer import to make us glad. Gideon had already received by God's own angel the word, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. Was not this enough for him? Whence is it that a boy's dreams comfort him more than God's own word? From Spurgeon. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies. There is no specific mention that God gave Gideon this plan through supernatural revelation, yet because Gideon was a spirit-filled man, the supernatural can operate very naturally in his life. Look at me and do likewise. The plan probably came very naturally to Gideon, but upon reflection, one can clearly see how the Holy Spirit prompted him. Then the 3 companies blew trumpets and broke the pitchers. The Midianite soldiers awoke to an explosion of noise, light, and movement coming down on them from all directions. No wonder they thought they were being attacked by an army even bigger than they were. And they cried, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." This cry was not the result of pride on Gideon's part. Instead, it showed wisdom in the attack, because clearly the Midianites were already afraid of the sword of Gideon, and shouting helped to send them into a panic. The Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. The first phase of the battle wasn't between Israel and Midian, but as the Midianites fought themselves. This is a good example of how we can be more than conquerors through him who loved us. We get the spoils of victory through Jesus. We get the spoils of victory, though Jesus won the battle for us. The early Christian writer Origen often emphasized elaborate spiritual meanings to biblical accounts. In this story, he made the 300 men types of preachers of the gospel. Their trumpets were a picture of preaching Christ crucified. Their torchlights represented the holy conduct of the preachers. I think there's a danger in over making things images of other things rather than what they actually are. I think it's good to draw out principles, but ultimately I think these are things that actually happened. And just because they happened doesn't mean that they don't have significance beyond the event itself. In that, I think this shows the general principle that we serve a great God, and trusting in Him would do us well, and we don't have anything to fear when God is on our side, or rather, we're on the side of God. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. If some have the courage to strike the enemy, there are others who will come out of their hiding places to hunt the beaten foe. When you really want help, often you cannot get it. But when you can afford to do without assistance, you will sometimes be embarrassed by it. Yeah. Come down against the Midianites. This was not unbelief on Gideon's part. Though God started the work with a small number of soldiers, once the work began, Gideon wanted many to get involved in the work. And they pursued Midian. God blessed the effort of the people of Ephraim, and they made good success against the enemy and their leaders. But Ephraim reprimanded him sharply. The men of Ephraim joined the fight against Midian when Gideon called to them. Yet they were upset that Gideon did not call to them before the battle started. Gideon's initial call for help went out to the tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. The men of Ephraim seem to have cared more about recognition than the overall good of Israel. Yeah, and you can see this by the fact that they were placated when Gideon reminded them of their military exploits. Instead of being jealous about the recognition that others received, they should have been happy that God's people were rescued and that they had some part in the victory. Jealousy often hinders the work of God. What have I now done in comparison with you? Gideon did not challenge their pride. Instead, he soothed their pride by complimenting them and giving them the recognition they seemed to crave. Most importantly, he challenged them to get involved in the work of God that was at hand. His reply was a wise way to deal with contention when there is work for the Lord that is to be done. Yet Gideon seemed to have had a continuing controversy with the men of Ephraim. His later making of an ephod was a disservice to Israel and may have been prompted by a competitive attitude toward Ephraim. He and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit. We can imagine how tired they were. They fought hard and pursued the enemy over a long distance. From Spurgeon here, if you, dear brethren and sisters, will give yourselves wholly to God's work, although you will never get tired of it, you will often get tired in it. If a man has never tired himself with working for God, I should think he never has done any work that was worth doing. Let us also serve the Lord when every moment is painful, when even to think is wearisome. These men were faint. You know what it is for a soldier to be faint. It is no nonsense, no pretense. It is real fainting. Yet to go running on when you are ready to faint, to keep right on when you are ready to drop, this is very trying work. Yet let us do it, brethren, by God's grace. Some people only pray when they feel like praying, but we need most to pray when we feel that we cannot pray. If we were only to preach, some of us, when we felt like preaching, we should not often preach. Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me. Through Gideon, the call came to the people of the city of Succoth to support those who fought the battle. They were not asked to engage in the actual battle, but simply to support those on the front line. Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? Instead of help, the people of Succoth and Penuel had an excuse. They didn't want to support Israel in the fight against Midian until the battle was already won. We can suppose that this was discouraging for Gideon and those fighting the battle. They didn't ask the people of Succoth and Penuel to fight on the front lines, only to support those who did. Yet they were unwilling and made excuses. When we set out to do the Lord's work, often the resistance we face is from our friends. We can't allow this to hinder or discourage our work. When the Lord has delivered, when I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower. With or without the help of the people of Succoth and Penuel, Gideon knew he would win the battle, saying when, not if. Yet he vowed to take revenge on these cities that refused to help the army of Israel at this strategic time. Some have said that this showed resentment and harshness, but when a man is at war, he is not in the habit of sprinkling his adversaries with rosewater. War is in itself so great an evil that there are many other evils necessarily connected with it. It seems to me that if, when Gideon was trying to deliver his own countrymen, they scoffed at him and refused him bread for his soldiers in the day of their hunger, they deserved to be punished with great severity. From Spurgeon. Yeah. Just in general, when it comes to secular warfare, an army marches on its stomach. And if there are no supplies for an army, then it greatly inhibits the things that they can do. And other secular armies throughout history have seized and plundered the countryside, and this to keep their armies moving and alive. So I guess what I'm saying is that it greatly intensifies the ramifications of the inaction of Succoth and Penuel here, in that they are actively helping their enemies by starving the army of Gideon of supplies. So, which is not a small thing. He attacked the army while the camp felt secure. Gideon, continuing in the boldness of the Lord, led a courageous surprise attack. This wasn't the same as the 300 attacking the vast army described in Judges 7:12, but it was still a small army against a much larger army. We can suppose that Gideon was bold enough to do this because he saw God do great things in similar circumstances before. The previous work of God encouraged him to trust God for great things in the present. Yeah, and that's why I think we are to remember, to recall to mind, to tell other people about the great working of God in the past. And use that to encourage us, because God is not going to just let us go without support. And he's supported us in the past. He will support us in the future. I was thinking of this verse from Chronicles regarding Asa, where the prophet comes to him and says essentially that the eyes of the Lord are looking throughout the earth to powerfully, to strongly support those whose hearts are fully committed to him. So he pursued and routed the whole army. This shows the persistence of Gideon. He fought until the battle was won, and he went after the leaders of the opposition. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, "The men of this city didn't want to help Gideon or his army before victory was assured. They refused to help Gideon by faith, and so Gideon would punish them as he had promised. He took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. Apparently Gideon publicly whipped the leaders of the city of Succoth with thorns and briars as a method of public rebuke. And he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. The text does not make it clear, but we suppose there was a justification for this severe penalty. Perhaps the people of Penuel were significant supporters of the Midianites and traitors against Israel." Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great day.